Well, I tell you, I am excited about being here with you today because today is that time that, listen, we come together. It is that time that we are empowered. It is that time that, listen, our relationships become stronger. And listen, it is never by accident. It is never by coincidence. It is always by intentionality that our relationships get better. And so this is why when you show up, you made a decision for your relationships to get better. When, listen, you bring other people to this space and place, you're saying to them, listen, I want our relationship to get better. I don't want it to just be me getting better, but I want it to be us getting better. And so therefore, listen, I'm inviting you to go ahead and share, if you haven't already shared, to bring people into this space and place because we are going to empower your relationships today. That's right. So listen, if you need to start a watch party on Facebook, go ahead and do it. Listen, if you are on YouTube, and we invite you to come and to be on our YouTube channel, but we also invite you, listen, to go ahead and subscribe. Listen, hit that subscribe button. If you're on YouTube, listen, you can hit the logo, the Life Empowerment crown logo there on the bottom side of your screen. And listen, you can go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're following us on our Life Empowerment Church page on Facebook, be sure to like it. Because, listen, we want you to know when we're going live, when we're going to empower, when we are going to prepare you, that's right, for a better relationship. And so here's what we always say: like, share, and follow. That's right, like, share, and follow if you are on Facebook. And listen, share the link if you are on YouTube. Well, listen, this is therapist and pastor Marcus Ruffin. That's right. This is therapist and pastor Marcus Ruffin. And listen, I am here today to empower your relationships. That's right. And so listen, I'm excited about what we're going to be continuing in today. And so listen, let us go ahead and begin to go forward with where we're going today. That's right. Listen, I'm just going ahead and adjusting the sound, adjusting the music, so that we can go ahead and move straight into what it is that we are delving into today. That's right. Listen, we're talking about dangerous expectations in relationships. We're talking about dangerous expectations in relationships. Now, listen, this is part 3. So if you have missed the previous parts, you can go back and see that on our YouTube channel. You can see that on our Facebook page. And so, listen, we thank you so much for being here. We thank you so much for tuning in and being here today so that you can be empowered. So, listen, here when we're talking about dangerous expectations, we've started with this particular passage so that you can be aware of what it is that we are discussing and why. Because listen, here we believe in the entire connection of spirit, soul, and body. See, if you're going to have a better relationship, it is not you just getting better in just the relationship itself, but it is you getting better in every aspect of who you are. And therefore, this is why we always start off with a particular scriptural passage, because we want to understand what is the spiritual principle. Then we're going to talk about what does that look like psychologically, what does that look like mentally, but then we also want to be able to look at how do we execute. And so listen, if you are watching this live and you have a question, you can put that right on the comment section, whether that's on YouTube or whether that is on Facebook, so that, listen, I can answer your questions in the here and now, in the live moment, because this is a live broadcast. So here, as you see on the screen behind me, that there is Proverbs 13:12. And reading that from the Amplified, it says, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but when desire is fulfilled, it is a tree of life. It says hope deferred. Now, we have explained this, but it's worth us covering again. Listen, hope deferred, that word hope there can be translated as expectation. So it says expectations deferred or expectations not met, listen, will make the heart. What is he talking about there? The mind, the will, the emotions. Listen, it will make your mind sick. It will make your emotions sick. Listen, it can have detrimental impacts upon your will, your willingness to do, your willingness to go forward, your willingness to repair and to do the work that is necessary to amend any kind of devastation that has happened in a relationship. And so when we understand, spiritually speaking, that here's what King Solomon, the wisest king that has ever lived, when he has told you and I that, listen, hope deferred, expectations not met will make you and I sick, it is imperative that we learn about expectations, because therefore any expectations that's not met can potentially become a dangerous expectation. And so listen, here we want to even say it this way. Not getting what you want can make you feel sick, but a wish that comes true is a life-giving tree. And so last week we were talking about this whole idea about expectations, right? And we were talking about whether or not they're even realistic, right? Recognizing that you and I have these expectations, and we're trying to figure out whether or not they're actually realistic. The reality is that you and I have expectations whether we want to or not. You and I come to the table, you and I come to a relationship with expectations across the board. Sometimes we're conscious of them, sometimes we're not. But the reality is that everybody has expectations around how they want to be loved. There's a way that you want to be loved. There's a way that I want to be loved. Everybody has expectations around how frequently they will communicate to each other. How many times is it that we've had problems simply because there wasn't adequate, there wasn't frequent, there wasn't consistent communication? And so sometimes we are having relationship issues, sometimes we're having expectation issues because of a mere communication problem. Expectations, listen, can revolve around your sex life. For those of us that are married, listen, expectations run throughout every aspect of a relationship, whether we're talking about finances, whether we're talking about friendships, whether we're talking about professional relationships, friendships. It doesn't matter the type of relationship. The reality is that we have expectations through all of these relationships. And so truly, the potential number of expectations are endless. And so remember last time we talked here about unrealistic expectations. Last week, now you would have to go back. I'm not going to go into all that, but I just want to give just a little clarification that when we talked about unrealistic expectations last week, here's what we said. Unrealistic expectations are non-communicated requests and or non-agreed upon requests. Let me say that again. Unrealistic expectations, not what you are expecting maybe is unrealistic, but it becomes unrealistic when it's not communicated and or non-agreed upon. Now, like I said, I don't want to go into all of that we covered last week, but here's the reality that we're also understanding, that unexamined expectations are the seeds of trouble and conflict. That's right. Listen, when you and I do not take time out to really look into our expectations, we can set ourselves up for failure. We can set ourselves up for disappointment. We can set ourselves up for all types of afflictions simply because we haven't examined whether or not our expectations are realistic. See, the reality is that most of us come with sometimes these myths. Sometimes we come with this magical thinking that somehow relationships should be effortless. And sometimes these unexamined expectations lead to preconceived ideas about how we think it is supposed to go or how we believe it was supposed to have gone. And therefore, when things don't match up with the expectations that we have in mind, we sometimes find ourselves in not only conflict, but sometimes good relationships have dissolved simply around the fact that there wasn't clarity regarding their expectations. And as much as you and I have unrealistic expectations, there's also the reality that you and I have unreasonable expectations. That's right. Listen, sometimes you and I have unreasonable expectations. See, you can have reasonable expectations, but you can also have unreasonable expectations. Now, remember, going back to the scripture, it says expectations not met makes the mind, the will, and the emotions sick. Sick how? Through affliction. Sick how? Through grief. Sick through being disease or disease. And so, therefore, this is why you and I, looking at our expectations, examining our expectations, we can see whether or not they're unrealistic. We can see whether or not they are unreasonable. And so, listen, once again, if you have a question, you can put that right on the YouTube channel, or you can put that on the Facebook page. And we're coming live to you from Life Empowerment Church. And so here, unreasonable expectations is what I want to kind of focus on today. So let's define what is unreasonable expectations. Unreasonable expectations is when a person is non-able to fulfill the request due to a lack or deficiency. Let me say that again. When you and I have an unreasonable expectation in a relationship, it is due to the person being non-able to fulfill the request due to a lack or deficiency. Now, I really want us to kind of really delve into this because often we can have reasonable expectations, but there's a percentage that we can have unreasonable expectations. See, a reasonable expectation I can have is that I expect from my spouse to remain faithful to me since we have agreed to a monogamous relationship. Another reasonable expectation, I can expect that my spouse to voice or my friend to voice any concerns that they have as it relates to the emotional health and overall connection in our relationship. That's a reasonable expectation. Anybody with basic functions and certain level of maturity should be able to fulfill that. And that's a reasonable thing that we can come into any relationship and expect. But when you and I have unreasonable expectations, these are the kind of expectations that, listen, they can block the intimacy. And when I say intimacy, I'm not talking about sex. I'm talking about the intimacy and where you allow yourself to be known, where you begin to be vulnerable, you begin to be transparent, you begin to allow somebody else into the inner workings of your life. They know you beyond the surface. And let me tell you, when you have unreasonable expectations, this is the kind of thing that can put you at arm's distance with somebody. This is the kind of thing that, listen, you will put somebody at arm's distance. And so, therefore, listen, when we consciously or unconsciously, listen, write up sometimes this laundry list of what it is that we want in somebody, whether it's a friendship, whether it is a romantic relationship, maybe even sometimes a professional relationship. And we are saying that, hey, here's the laundry list. Here's what they have to do in order for me to be happy. And when we have determined that this list is non-negotiable, When we have written out this list and we say, here are the must-haves, I'm telling you that is a potential for a dangerous expectation. Because here's the thing, is that even if the person starts meeting those items, or even if the person is meeting those items, but something changed, maybe something outside of their control, something outside of their ability, but it changes, listen, it will set the relationship up for failure. And it's simply because our expectations, maybe at one time they were realistic, maybe at one time they were reasonable, but just like any relationship that has ebb and flows, sometimes we have to make adjustments in those relationships, and we have to, once again, examine our expectations, because remember, unexamined expectations are the seeds of conflict and turmoil. And so therefore, when those relationships expectations continue to become unreasonable, they get to a place to where, listen, it's almost impossible for them to be fulfilled. Matter of fact, I want to talk about three, I think, that across the board that can be very toxic when we talk about unreasonable expectations. This first one, if you look behind me, I have it on the screen. And it says this, it says, here's the unreasonable toxic expectation. If they really loved me, they would know what I needed. Yeah, that's right. Listen, if they really love me, I've even heard this sometimes said, if they really knew me, then they would know what I needed. And I'm telling you, this kind of expectation is unreasonable. Why? Because people are not mind readers. And because people are not mind readers, what happens is that no one can know what it is that you need from moment to moment, from day to day, from hour to hour. And sometimes we are having this kind of expectations. And therefore, we think that we should have somebody that knows us without us having to express ourselves, with us having to communicate our desires, with us having to tell a person what we like, what we don't like. And listen, I've seen this happen in romantic relationships. I've seen this happen in friendships. I've seen this even happen in professional relationships when they have grown to a more personable kind of connection in a professional atmosphere. And so they begin to have these notions that somehow, if we were really together, if we were really connected, if there was really the kind of love that's here. I've even seen this happen in spiritual relationships where you talk about church, or you talk about persons that are of the same faith, and they would sometimes take the same concept and say, well, if you were truly listening to God, if you were truly filled with the Spirit of God, you know, if you truly had a prayer life, and so these notions that somehow I am not responsible for having to communicate to you or to the other person or persons, and that somehow this falls into this ethereal, or this falls into this sort of extra spiritual connection. It takes the responsibility off of me and puts it solely on you. But any relationship that is of value and significance requires both parties, or all parties, to have the same kind of investment and commitment to making it work. And therefore, if you have this idea that somehow, if they really love me, they would know what I needed, that's a toxic, unreasonable expectation. I'm looking to see if I have any questions. I don't see any questions right now. Here's another one that can become a toxic, unreasonable expectation. It shouldn't take work I've seen this especially in romantic relationships. And there's this notion that if the relationship was really destined to work out, then it should work out. There should be no real effort. There shouldn't be this sort of intentionality by which we've got to, kind of do some things to really make us connect consistently and to make things really gel well. And so therefore, I think what happens is that when people are looking for the chemistry, do we have chemistry? Chemistry over so much time can lead to this sort of misbelief that we shouldn't have to work to be able to make this happen. And I'm telling you that any good relationship, professional, friendship, romantic, spouse, marriage, listen, it's going to require work. And therefore, listen, sometimes I've seen people leave a relationship that had the beginning stages of really growing something that could really be significant because they ran into some obstacles, they ran into some challenges, and therefore it was requiring a little more work on their end. And I'm telling you that if you and I are going to have the kind of relationships that really matter, listen, you're going to have to recognize that it takes work to make it happen. Now, let me also give this sort of exception. There are some times that you see couples that have this abnormally high-functioning connecting relationship. And it seems as if their relationship really works with a lot of ease and there's not a lot of challenge in the midst of it. Usually those are relationships that they have worked over time, years, months. There are sometimes elements that they bring to the table because of other relationships that they've had to work through, other characteristics and traits that they had to kind of develop over time. And so now they've kind of arrived at a high functioning level, and they meet somebody else that is at another high functioning level. And so therefore they have a lot of communication skills under their belt. They have a lot of conflict resolution skills under their belt. That they have a lot of filters by which they're able to really understand unreasonable, unrealistic expectations. And because they put in the work, now when they find somebody else that has put in the work, they really gel well together, and it doesn't always take long, and they're able to really fortify that and continue that over a long period of time. But people don't get there just simply because they were great. They were able to arrive at that place. Their relationship was able to arrive at that place because they put in the work that it took to be able to make it happen. And this is what I'm saying to you, that therefore, listen, you and I have to recognize that when we see these exceptions, that they didn't violate the rules. They didn't break the principles. They maximized them. They had really worked them. And so therefore, great marriages put in great work. Great friendships put in great work. Great parenting, child relationships, they put in the work. And so you've got to get out of this notion that if it's a great relationship, then I don't have to work. That is a toxic misnomer. Another element that I have found to be important when we're talking about unreasonable expectations in relationships is going back to number 3 or coming to number 3 as you see on the screen. And listen, this is when you expect your spouse or your friend to fill every void in your life at all times. Listen, I can't tell you how many relationships I have seen, how many people I have counseled, how many people I have worked with, and which they're looking to the relationship to fulfill certain deficits in their personal life. And because they have some deficits that, listen, nobody else can fulfill, nobody else can compensate, that because they have not dealt with some of those inner deficits, they're looking for somebody else to somehow be the one. They're looking for someone else to have what it takes to be able to get them sometimes out of the ditch. Now, granted that there are times in which we all need encouragement and we can all benefit from somebody coming by and just really uplifting us. But if I am constantly maybe dealing with some self-esteem issues, I'm dealing with some real challenging identity issues, and so therefore I'm looking for the other person to try to fill up my tank because because I live with an empty tank. Listen, you're going to overtax that relationship. You're going to burn out that person because you are asking from them what no relationship with another individual was designed to give. That is a relationship that is there to complement, to add, but that is not a relationship that is there to make up what I lack internally. And therefore, because sometimes this is what happens with us, we are therefore looking to somebody else to fulfill what nobody else can fulfill. See, if I don't love me, let me give you a spiritual principle that goes with it. Jesus says in the Bible, he says this. He says that to love your neighbor as you love yourself. So how can I love my neighbor to the level that they should be loved if there is a deficit in me loving me? As much as I may want to, desire, and would try to love my neighbor, the reality is that I am quite limited in loving my neighbor based upon my ability to love myself. And so this is why the third one, you expect your spouse or your friend to fill every void in your life at all times. This is a real toxic, unreasonable request that you and I can have in relationships, whether it is a friend, whether it is a spouse. And listen, you can even carry this over into professional relationships. And therefore, this is why I'm telling you that it is up to us to sometimes do the work that we need to do on ourselves so that we can be in a better space and place to be able to love those that are a part of our circle, that are part of our lives. And sometimes we don't want to deal with those things, and we're looking for somebody else. And we were looking at this last week now, and we were talking about how expectations are developed. That's right. Listen, we were talking about how expectations are developed. Now, when we were looking at this, we talked about this in part 1 and in part 2. We're on part 3 today. And we were looking at family of origin. We talked about how expectations are developed based upon the type of family that we were raised in, what they exposed us to, the kind of relationships that we had there. All that helped shape and mold our expectations and relationships based upon the kind of things that we experience in our home life. It doesn't matter whether you're raised by your parents, raised by a grandparent, aunt, uncle, foster home. That family of origin created certain levels of expectations. Then we talked about previous relationships. We talked about this last week, and we talked about how our previous experiences can impact the kind of expectations that we go into the next relationship. Sometimes those are good expectations. Sometimes those are bad expectations. But the reality is that they're expectations. And so we looked at how previous relationships can impact our expectations. Now, once again, if you missed last week or part 1 of this, you can go back on our YouTube page or on our Facebook page and be able to watch those broadcasts. And so here's the next thing that I want to talk to you about today. And this will be the last thing before we bring this to a close. So notice now, number 3 is the culture. That's right. Listen, the culture, the media, books, friendship. Now, I say friends. I probably should have said relationship, other relationships. All of those things impact what we bring to the table, what we expect in relationships. Because listen, the reality is that you and I were born into a culture that shapes every aspect. Listen, there are certain foods that you like based upon the fact that this is what you were exposed to. And when you are exposed to another different type of food, it's like the palate. Your palate, your tongue is like, this doesn't taste good. I don't like this. It's simply because I'm not used to having this type of food, or I'm not having this particular type of flavor. And so that has shaped and molded what I prefer. And especially when I talk about comfort foods, this is what I like to go to. Why? Because this is what I've learned to enjoy. Well, that same thing impacts the kind of clothes that you wear. You choose the clothes that you wear because somehow the culture, maybe it's magazines, maybe it's the movies, maybe it is some other friends that you kind of look up to, that you really enjoy how they dress, and therefore that's kind of like your point of reference. And so culture, media, books, entertainment, all of that shapes who we are today. Well, when you think about these different experiences, you've got to begin to think about the messages that we have experienced. So when we talk about gender roles, when we talk about advertisements, we talk about movies, we talk about music, magazines, all of those things influence what it is when we are having relationships. And so therefore, when we have been bombarded with these type of influences, it shapes our expectations in relationships. It shapes whether those expectations are unrealistic, whether those expectations are reasonable, unreasonable. And so therefore, when it comes to your marriage, you have certain expectations based upon what you've been exposed to. and what you have determined to be good, normal, healthy. Listen, when you talk about dating, depending upon what has been your experience and what you've been told and what you have been influenced by, will determine, hey, who's asking who to go out? Who's paying for the dinner? Now, I know that I have people that are watching this from all different generational eras. And so older generation would say, well, the man would always pay first. I mean, the man would always ask out. And I get that. And I'm not trying to say that's wrong. I'm just highlighting that that is one era. When you talk about today's era, that there is this sort of belief that, hey, it is okay for the woman to ask just as much as it's okay for the man to ask. And over generations, these sort of rules and regulations change. And because these things change, sometimes my expectations of yesterday are different than my expectations of tomorrow. But this also impacts the relationships. And so if I'm an older person and I'm interacting with a younger person, our expectations may collide, not because we have bad intentions or because anyone is bad versus good. The reality is that I've been shaped and molded by my generation. I've been shaped and molded by the influencers of my day. And therefore, sometimes our expectations are unreasonable simply because there's a generational difference. Sometimes our unreasonable expectations is because there's a gender difference. And so sometimes this impacts our friendships. This will impact our marriages, roles, and expectations. You talk about marriage and you say, well, okay, do you have a traditional role, or do you have a more current mode? And what I mean by that is old mode, traditional mode may say, well, hey, the woman's going to cook, the woman's going to do the grocery shopping, but at the same time, the current role may be we both grocery shopping, we're both cooking. And so, but if that is an expectation that I have, that can be conflicting for somebody else that comes to the table and they literally are saying, I don't ascribe to that particular view. And so this is why when we're talking about unreasonable expectations, remember that when we're talking about unreasonable expectations, and let me go back to my definition, we're talking about unreasonable expectations that a person is not able to fulfill the request due to a lack or deficiency. And what I mean by that is they may not even know what it is that you are expecting or what it is that you would like for them to do. I can remember counseling with a couple, and here was the layout. The guy had grown up with, I believe he had asthma. And if you don't know anything about asthma, listen, asthma, I had asthma as a child. You can have asthma attacks. Asthma is basically when your bronchial tubes restrict, and so you can't get enough air into your lungs. And so you are short of breath, and it can really make you weak at times. It can make you just immobile at times. There were times I actually had to go to the doctor and get a steroid shot to open up my bronchial tube so that I could breathe better. And so it can really be pretty limiting if you have asthma. And there are various degrees. There are some people that actually have to be hospitalized. And there's some people that just kind of get a breathing treatment. They go on. Some people just have a little inhaler. Hey, they're good. So this guy, I think, had a significant case of asthma as a kid. And so therefore, he wasn't really the type to do domestic activities. So he didn't really clean up, because in cleaning up, the dust, the pollen, cutting the grass outside, all that could trigger an asthma attack. And so this kid was kind of light on household chores and duties. Well, he got older. Sometimes people get healed from it. Sometimes people grow out of it. And so he was older. Him and his wife ascribed to a traditional view. And so, no, I'm sorry, it wasn't their traditional view. They had a current model. And so they were like, hey, we're going to share in these household duties. Well, as much as he wanted to share in them, the reality is that he had no prior knowledge. He had no real prior experience. And so when it was time for him to clean, he did more damage than good. One of the stories I remember was that, he took Clorox. And this was the powder Clorox, not the liquid Clorox, but the powder Clorox. And he was putting that on a wood table, because when he cleaned the bathroom, he used the powder Clorox, and he had used that to clean the tub. And so he thought, well, if I'm cleaning the table, I'm gonna use the same element. Well, anybody out there that's listening that knows anything about cleaning, the last thing that you're going to do is to use Clorox to clean wood. You're going to damage it. And the reality was, it was an unreasonable request, not because he didn't have the ability, but he had a deficiency in the knowledge. And sometimes we're asking things from people that they have a deficiency. They look able, they look competent, they appear to have what it takes. But remember, unexamined expectations are the seed of conflict and turmoil. And when you and I have not really assessed whether or not this person or persons are capable, listen, we can set ourselves up for unreasonable expectations. And those unreasonable expectations, listen, if they're high in demand and this person is low in functionality of executing that particular expectation, let me tell you, you're going to be diseased. You remember what we read? It says that expectations not met or hope deferred makes the heart sick. Expectations not met make the heart sick, makes the heart afflicted, makes the mind afflicted, even to the point to where it can create disease. I'm telling you that you and I being able to understand unreasonable expectations are significant if you and I are going to have the kind of relationships that bring about mutual fulfillment, the kind of relationships that are bringing about the kind of satisfaction that we both want to stay in relationship with each other. I'm telling you that it's possible. I'm telling you that it's doable, but it comes with work. That's right. Listen, it comes with work. And because it comes with work, here's why I say, whether you're looking to improve a love relationship, a familial relationship, or an employer-employee relationships, understanding your expectations will bring a new dynamic to the situation, because once we can have clarity around our expectations, once we can have clarity around what is expected, what's reasonable, it puts us all in a place to be able to have those expectations fulfilled, because sometimes we may have to make a little adjustment, sometimes on their side, sometimes on our side, sometimes on all of our sides. But we're able to have the kind of fulfillment that brings about the kind of relationships that you and I want to stay a part of, you and I want to be in connection with, and you and I want to come back to them. That's right. Listen, this is your pastor and therapist, Marcus Ruffin. And listen, I want to thank you so much for being here for Ruffin It today. Listen, relationship empowerment. That's right. This is where we begin to learn how we become better in our relationships. This is where we get the empowerment. We get the information. We get the understanding that causes our relationships to thrive. Not just survive. Not just somehow, we barely made it, but we made it through the finish line. No. I'm talking about relationships that operate at high functioning levels. You know why? Because we do the work to get there. We climb the ladder to get there. And then we learn what we need to learn to operate at that level consistently. That's right. Listen, this is Ruffin It. Listen, we usually do this on Thursdays, but we did it today on Wednesday because tomorrow is Thanksgiving. And so we wanted you to be able to enjoy your Thanksgiving. But we didn't want you to miss out on an opportunity to really empower your relationship, because some of the greatest challenges we have is sometimes around these family celebrations, Thanksgiving and Christmas and family reunions and other get-togethers, and sometimes where we have the greatest challenges. But I'm telling you, because you've been coming here and because you've been getting informed, you now understand a little more about how to have the kind of relationship that brings maximum results. And so listen, if you're with us on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to our channel. Make sure that you click the bell notification so that you can get that indication. Listen, that you like our Life Empowerment Church page, so that when we go live, listen, you can get that information. Remember, like, share, and follow. And here's the last but not least thing. Listen, we thank you so much for being here today. But listen, we also want to give you the opportunity to be able to support Life Empowerment Church. This is brought to you by Life Empowerment Church. And so listen, we're asking that if this has been a blessing to you, that you would be a blessing to Life Empowerment Church. And so here's our different ways that you can give. If you have the Cash App, here's our Cash App information so that you can give digitally. If you would like to be able to give through PayPal, here's our information. Here's our PayPal account so that you can pay, you can give or donate through PayPal. Maybe you would like to just go online and go directly to our website. You can go to our website and give right online there. And so we thank you so much for you being able to do just that. We also want to let you know that, listen, for some of you that prefer to mail a check or you like to write a money order, listen, that information is right there on your screen. So that here's our mailing address for those of you that would like to participate in that manner. But no matter which way you participate, listen, we want to thank you so much for participating and allowing us to empower and to maximize you. And last but not least, listen, we want to let you know that, listen, this has been Life Empowerment Church, Ruffin It, Relationship Empowerment. And so we thank you so much for being here with us. We look forward to seeing you next Thursday as we go back to Thursdays again, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we thank you for being here and allowing us to do what you needed to have done. Relationship empowerment. God bless you, and we'll see you the next time.